I'm John Barclay, and welcome to the Fatality-Free Future podcast.
My name is Holly Ferguson. This is the podcast where we explore the challenges and possibilities of creating a fatality-free future. If you've been listening chronologically to the podcast, you'll know we love telling a really good story.
We can get a bit carried away sometimes, yes.
But we wanted to really intentionally focus on storytelling today, and to help us explore this topic, we've brought in our colleague, Dorit Ozchakir. Welcome, Dorit.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Dorit, you're a recent addition to the Barclays team, and you've come in as a safety innovation consultant. But I'd love to know about your background and what brought you here today.
My background is business psychology. I've been studied in the last 4.5 years, my bachelor in science, undergrad in psychology. Which led me to organizational psychology, which I very much like and very passionate about. Storytelling, our big topic for today, is actually something I came across in my business psychology, one of the units of health and safety. My master coordinator, Dr. Lizette Kentz, introduced us with her PhD student, Patrick Benetti, and he wrote a recent paper named Effective Leader Safety Storytelling, Its Attributes and Outcomes. And I thought that's just brilliant, how you can take something we all do since childhood, sharing excitement, funniest or worst experience, or even as a parent, we love to use storytelling. Just to remind our kids that we were in their shoes not long time ago. I thought it just very interesting how we can use storytelling to convey safety message. And this is where I thought that would be a great addition for the industry, just to know what is needed in order to create a robust, impactful, long-lasting storytelling.
I find that interesting, right, that we've grown up with storytelling. As kids, we'd come home and tell the story of the day. Our parents would tell stories about their childhood. But it's interesting when you go out and look at in the workplace how we haven't always embraced that communication style. We sort of put that aside, and now it's all about telling and instructing. And yes, there's a place for that, but I really like where you came from there, because research shows that as people, we tell stories and we connect to stories. And you even go way back when it's all about storytelling. All Indigenous cultures all talk about the storytelling process, and as humans, we connect to stories. It's really interesting that we've sort of taken that out of the workplace and replaced it with another communication style.
Yeah. Maybe people think that having clear communication is the absence of, getting waffly or giving background on stuff, but that's how we connect as people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That reminds me, actually, one of the very first lectures as an undergrad, the lecturer came and just threw us a list of 50 words, just random words, and asked us to recall them. And then she plotted them into a story, and then we can see the retention of in our memory, how we can actually grab and remember the message. More words were within a story structure. And actually, when I started to write this guide, I was very keen to know what the mechanics behind storytelling. And apparently, our human brain engages in a process that calls a neural coupling. So it's a neuron firing in sync. So when you speak, John, and I'm listening to you, my brain mirrors your neural activity, which is fascinating by itself. And that actually activates some emotion in my brain areas of emotional, sensory, and decision making. So that's quite interesting. I find that just incredible.
Dorit, you mentioned a guide there, which was one of the first things you did at Barclays. We threw you in the deep end. We said, hey, what assets do you want to create for our audience? And you said, I want to write a guide about the power of storytelling. Yeah. What inspired you to write that?
Just this, again, this recent paper, which I think it's so valuable. We really work hard to consult to our clients and guide them through. But storytelling is something that you need to craft in a very specific way. So this paper actually outlines the attributes for a good storytelling. And this is something that requires practice. So we can all practice and we can coach people to do that in order to seize this moment and make it very impactful for the audience. So if you think about health and safety manager would like to share a good storytelling and really create this rumination or this message that stuck in, occupied our brain, that's exactly what is needed. So I think this guide is just a good tool.
Yeah, it's great having you as a part of the team and bringing in much more capability to actually start to get into the real detail around some of these things that we've been coaching on for a long time. I wanted to pick up on something that you said, around that sort of emotional connection to thing, and we sort of gravitate to that. Or something I read recently around logical or concentration helps us think, but emotion helps us act. That all goes to that limbic part of our brain, right? Where, when we make an emotional connection to something, we tend to remember it. It gets instilled more as a automatic response in that typical sort of fight, flight or freeze response. If we've got emotional connection to something, that all starts to come together. I've really been curious about this stuff for a long time. For example, I run a lot of workshops, and for me, I'm like, why have some gone better than others? And I constantly reflect, why did that work? Like, why did I get a lot of energy out of that group today? And why did I get a lot of positive feedback after, where others were a bit flat? And if I actually reflect back on it, it was probably because I added more storytelling in those workshops than I did in the others.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how people do connect the emotional aspect to the experience.
Yeah. And I think people process information in different ways. So when you use different ways of communications, such as using storytelling or using a different communication skill or technique or framework, it all will resonate eventually to the larger extent of your large audience. So we need to consider that people are different and their information processing is different, and we need to find the right ways to tackle at least most of our audience to convey a message.
And the good thing I liked about the guide that you wrote, piecing together a story and the critical elements of it taps into that. Some people will gravitate more to the emotional aspect of the story or maybe the technical aspect of the story or the context part of the story. So everyone sort of connects to a different part of the story. But when you craft a really good story, you have a greater opportunity to reach a wider audience and a wider group of people.
Let's lay it out. What are some of the elements we need for good and successful storytelling?
That's the beauty of research. I love a good research because it really refine and allow us to focus on the meaningful attributes that really matters. So this paper that I mentioned before focus on two dimensions of attributes, the story itself and the presentation. So some of the story attributes that Patrick outlined in his paper relates to the reliability of the story. So we'd like to create clear characters and very clear plot of the story itself. The story has to be factual. So I know that storytelling, we can be like over dramatic, but we still want to create a factual, honest and accurate, because people know to recognize when we, manipulate them. So we really want
over exaggerate.
Yeah, exactly. So we'd like to create something that is very factual and genuine, and that really contributes to the credibility as well. We would like to include the consequences, so the severity and the impact of the occasion. And we would like to have a clear structure, so preferably a cause and effect logic, because our mind builds in a way that we need the right flow to make sense out of things. And descriptive, that's another element that was mentioned in this paper, creates a vivid mental picture. So going back to these emotionals or sensory areas of the brains that are triggered, you think about that the small descriptions can actually create a scene, set a scene. So what would the noise, what was the noise like? What was the vision, or what smell could you smell or felt? So was it cold? Was it hot? So this actually resonates with the human experience, and people tend to recall that better. And also another attribute was the end of the message should inspire and provoke reflection. So I found that the story attributes a very much important to set up a good storytelling. The other focus was presentation attributes. So this is where he outlined that engaging in verbal and body language is a key. And the use of rhetorical questions now, this is a funny thing because yesterday at 37 degrees, I went with my daughter's class excursion, and we had the privilege to attend a dance storytelling by the Noongar people. And this wonderful man just started to talk with the kids and ask them all these random questions, rhetorical questions. And you know what happened? Or can you believe it? And I thought that's incredible. That's spot on. Just before our podcast, I have this example to cite because when I saw the kids engage with his storytelling, I thought that's fantastic. He keeps them engaged. He keeps them curious about his story. So definitely implement some rhetorical question to maintain this connection with the audience, and visual aids that really enhance our cognition, memory, retention, and decision making, because many of us are just visual persons. People.
When you think about the structure of that, for our listeners out there, I think it's just really important to practice. As Dorit kept saying there, practice is key. But, if you're not someone that's used a lot of storytelling, if you've sort of not embraced that as a part of your communication style with your team, do some prep work. Just put those sort of bits down first and think about who are the people, characters. It might be telling a story about what happened yesterday at work, but who are the people? What are some of the facts? What are some of the critical bits in there? And, how do you be a little bit vulnerable in that, so the honesty and the communication that comes in that. And connect to why you're telling the story. There's obviously some consequences and some impact to why you're telling this story. And I really like the rhetorical question bit. It sort of brings me to one of the funny experiences I keep having in the workshops I run with teams on site. We're talking about the power of questions, and we're getting into the conversation about questions. And I'll share this story about, I was running a workshop. I had a bunch of leaders just like yourselves in the room, and we're talking about the power of questions, and we're coming up with different questions to ask. And I just put the question out to this group. So, I think why is a great question. And the group just went, you never ask why. So my rhetorical question is, so do you know what happened next? And I went, yeah, you asked why. And it's like, exactly. I asked this group, so why don't you ask why? And then we got this 20-minute conversation, and I asked why a couple of times in there. And it was I was giggling away to myself a bit, so I was getting that through. And eventually I called time on the conversation. So how did everyone feel about that conversation? So I try to get into how people felt about something, not just a message. And they loved it, learned a lot about this, learned all about that. And then I just said, well, that all came from me asking why. You can tell a story about maybe what was happening at work or what happened the day before, and just stick a rhetorical question in there. So I bet you know what they said.
Yeah.
Right? I bet you know what happened next. And it's just those sorts of things. It makes it interactive. It makes it fun. And I think you're right. It brings people into that story.
Absolutely.
You've given us an example of what makes storytelling successful, but is there ever a bad time for storytelling? Are there any elements we should avoid?
We really need to seize a moment that you grab people's attention. So you preferably would like a moment where people have your attention. If you see someone busy, you can't really expect this person to be attentive to your message. So I think in order to create a good storytelling, or to utilize the storytelling as a tool to convey a message, specifically safety message, you really want to set the scene. You want to ensure that everyone's in the mindset of listening. Active listening is a key here. Make some space for people to actually attend your message.
Sometimes we have set up routines in our business to have people's attention for a period of time, like a pre-start or a toolbox or a meeting. So sometimes we already have established means to have people's attention. And those are your opportunities as a leader or a participant in that routine to seize the moment, to know this is a conversation we need to have. This is something I want to put in and start to get everyone thinking about, working through, acting on, whatever the purpose is for you to do that in that moment. And I just don't think we see enough of leaders recognizing that I have this team for the next 10 or 15 minutes and all their attention is on me as the one facilitating this conversation. Actually start thinking about that conversation, and it can be a storytelling conversation. There are times where distracting someone or interrupting someone and getting to a story that takes 10 minutes to tell is probably going to do the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. So it's knowing that, but also in those moments, this is the other part, and I have this conversation with leaders all the time, I really empathise with the challenge. You want a pre-start that only lasts 10 or 12 minutes, but you also want to have a meaningful conversation in that 10 or 12 minutes. So how do you fit a story into that's not going to take 20 minutes to tell and have a 20-minute conversation on? Because now you've just probably lost a bunch of people because it took too long. So I think this is the art we're talking about here, knowing when to seize the moment, knowing how to have that, and knowing when I probably need to sacrifice a bunch of other conversations that we might normally have because this story is just too important. I need to talk about this today, and I don't mind if it takes up 80% of that pre-start or 80% of that toolbox because it's such an important subject or something really important for us as a team to get aligned on or understand and get engaged in.
John, I'm actually really interested in your experience, because I know you naturally tell stories, but maybe you've noticed other people tell stories as well that have been really successful. Do you have anything you can share about when you've noticed a really impactful story being told?
Look, a recent one was a supervisor who has a pre-start, and the flow of the pre-start has this one topic about stopping work. Yeah. And most days, most weeks, it's a closed question. Did anyone stop work yesterday? No, and they all move on. I was out with this supervisor and we're out there looking at work, we're talking to people about work, and we saw this situation where this escort driver, the driver that escorts big vehicles in on sites and keeps everyone away from it, they'd got there to meet the driver, but they didn't bring the sign at the front and the back of the vehicle that said escort vehicle, right? But they knew someone was coming in about 15, 20 minutes, and they radioed them to get that, to bring it with them. And I said to the supervisor, I said, what did you notice about that? So it was really good to see that they're prepared to wait 15, 20 minutes and do it safely. All right. So is that just a very simple example of stopping the job until it's safe to do so? Oh, yeah, it is. I said, right. So if you think about your pre-start tomorrow, when you get to that section of the pre-start, how are you going to approach that? What does that really look like? I'm just going to tell that story. I said, right. So you've got a character, you've got a person, you've got facts, you've got consequences, you've got all these elements that can make up a story that is probably only going to take you a minute or two to tell. And it's just so much more powerful than just saying, did anyone stop the job yesterday? Absolutely. No, move on. And I deliberately went to that person's pre-start the next day so I could sort of see if that stuck, and it did. He was, the excitement he had that this pre-start's gone from nah, yes, no, to actually he told this story with energy and passion and pride, even that his team was demonstrating a stop work behaviour that wasn't stop work and everyone gets negative about it. It was just a subtle thing that was really important, that's not normally noticed, but because he told a story about it, the two people involved in that then engaged in it.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciated such and such being able to take the time, go back and get my signs and come back. There was just such a good interaction and communication. But afterwards, when I asked the team, I said, if you don't mind, can I just sort of, when you talked about it, they said, well, we should do that more often, because I don't even realise how simple and subtle a stop work behaviour is. Some people think it's a big thing. I've got to stop all this job and everyone's going to get angry because I've stopped the job. Sometimes it's just subtle. I've just got to stop and wait until I get something. Stop and ask someone to go get me something. So that was just a really recent example that I thought was just really good to see.
Yeah. What I really liked actually from your example is the acknowledgement component. So that's another thing to consider when you think about creating this psychological safety within your work environment. That's an opportunity for the leader to actually praise this type of behavior. So it encourages, it has like a snowball effect where you acknowledge someone, put them in the right spot.
Yep.
And that's great because it actually prompts others to behave in the same way. And people can relate to this type of behaviors if that's their work environment and this is the expectation. It's familiar. It's a familiar scene for them. So it's very easy to mimic this type of behavior in the following shift or task.
And I think this is the thing for our listeners here is sometimes you're going to miss the opportunity and you reflect back and you said, oh, that was probably a moment I could have seized and had a really good story to tell. Sometimes the story is going to be told and yet you may not meet all the elements that Dorit explained in a really good, powerful story, but that's okay. It is. It's okay. Just keep thinking about how do I get that message across? Is that message better to get across in a story? Is that better to get across in a practical applications? I think we get trapped, and this is my observation when I go out in the field and spend time with leaders, I think we just get trapped in just going through the motions. Like we just go through the motions of a pre-start or a toolbox or a meeting. And then when you actually take a moment and say, how's everyone? It's like Groundhog Day. It's boring. I'm disconnected. I'm not. People are switching off. And I'm like, well, easiest thing you can do to make all those routines different is tell stories.
Yeah.
Because every story is different. So just tell more stories.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's a really great example of using recent experiences to utilize for the benefit of the team. If they're, like you said, people feel like it's a bit like Groundhog Day sometimes, and maybe nothing has happened recently for a leader to draw upon. What advice do you both have about diving into past experiences without, trying to fill in too many details with fictional things? Is there a way that we can reflect and be like, oh, that would be a good story?
Yeah, for me, everyone that knows me, I share my experience around why I got into doing what I'm doing and the passion and the purpose I have for trying to achieve a world where it's fatality-free, and that's the whole point of this podcast, right? It's a fatality-free future. And the challenge with fatality prevention is it's low frequency, high consequence. And we've had many, for those who are listening through, we've had many conversations around what that is. What you have the opportunity to do when in the moment, when someone's exposed to a fatality potential situation, talk about stuff that might have happened 20 years ago. I do it all the time, especially when people are working around suspended loads and things. I can really tap into telling that story. And I do have the people who were involved, and I was one of them. I do have the facts to go into that conversation around exactly how it happened and what were the considerations in that process. There's very clear consequences I'm communicating around the fatality that happened. I'm able to bring energy and emotion and detailed description around how I felt and how others felt and what others were observing and missing. Those who have been in industry or different industries, you'll have experiences, and don't be afraid to talk about those experiences and share them, especially if they're relevant to something you're trying to have a conversation about at that. Now, on the flip side of that, if you don't have the experiences, you may have read incidents, you may have read scenarios where a fatality happened or something significant happened in the similar context. So that's why I say to people, don't just brush off these incident notifications and descriptions. They're another opportunity for you to foster some storytelling.
Yeah.
What do you learn about that incident? It may not have happened to you. You may not have been there. So the emotional connection can come into, well, when I read that incident, this is how this made me feel. And then I started to think about what it would be if that was one of our team members. And so you can bring in how learning about another event that you weren't a part of, how it actually felt and how it impacted you. So we have a lot of information. I think a lot of our leaders have these either experiences or shared learnings from other people's experiences to foster your own opportunities for storytelling.
And I think I'll jump in for a second because I really liked what she said. But I think it's not only exclusive for leaders and managers, and by just be exposed there and be vulnerable and share these experiences. And again, it doesn't have to be a good experience. It can be even, unfortunately, an unfortunate incident that occurred. But the beauty is that you really put people in a position that they started to feel they resonate with this practice of storytelling. They resonate with this conversation, and you actually create a cycle where people start to share their own experience and engage in storytelling. And we know that works. I mean, this is how we've been working for generations. All the knowledge that we acquire, we pass on. That's the way it works. And it's so powerful to be able to actually facilitate this type of conversation within an organization. And the other thing that I wanted to add is actually something that appeared in the book, How to Speak Human by Jackson Jay. So some of the human factors, such as emotions, the empathy, the sadness, the tension, or the vision and curiosity. So our brain is actually set up in a way that we really want to bridge any gaps in information. So just by crafting a story with still factual and very descriptive information, but yet in a way that will evoke this curiosity, we can actually enhance and reinforce this learning and memory retention. And people will it will just sit on the back of their mind always when they operate. I remember that one. This story, that was the consequences. And if you think about emotional creation or evoking emotions, talking about a message that stick at the back of your mind, I attended one of the webinars that displayed a video where a person was asked how many people are killed on the road, and he said X amount of people. And he said, yeah, that's really sad. That's a huge number. And suddenly, all this amount of people came alive in front of him. And I still have goosebumps because you could see the emotion that was created on his face. And as for me, as an audience, powerful of creating this emotion by vision tool or something that is much more tangible, in order to comprehend the size.
I can remember a similar visual exploration. Quite a few sites do this now around dropped objects, because we talk about dropped objects and people get a bit blasé with them, and they build a scaffold that's 5 meters tall, and they'll have a tube going down, and then at the bottom they'll have a watermelon, and they'll drop an object and just show you what gravity does for a very small object and the damage it does to a watermelon. And it's a very visual, it invokes emotional connection to what that is. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to switch that watermelon out with someone's head, right? Yeah. So these are really powerful things, and I think organisations are trying to do it a little bit more, but I think as individuals we have an opportunity just to tell those stories and really bring that in, and not just always think about a complex demonstration of something. If you can find a way to do it, that's even greater, right? It's a great, powerful thing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys, for sharing both of your experiences. We've got the research side of things and then a little bit of how it actually looks like in the field. It's really nice to see how these things marry together. And it proves that this is how the research is backing up what we're seeing and experiencing in the field with storytelling.
Yeah.
To wrap up, what are some little bits of advice that we can give leaders just to incorporate storytelling into their day-to-day practice?
First thing I'll say is download the guide, because
very good.
I just think that really helps you get greater explanation of this. So download the guide. That'll help you think about this. Pay attention to what's going on around you, and they're all opportunities to tell stories. So pay attention to what's going on around and think about that, and then take the time to plan and prepare your message to your teams or who can tell the story. Download the guide, pay attention to what's going on around you, and then take some time to think about structuring your story to invoke greater connection.
How about you, Dorit?
So I'll just add up a preparation. That's a key, but practice. Yep. We're not, crafted to go and tell a story in a very specific way. So we need to practice to succeed in that way. And like any other skill that we can obtain, that's one of the skill that we need to create as leaders.
Dorit, thank you very much for joining us on the Fatality-Free Future podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatality-Free Future podcast. Head to our Fatality-Free Future Hub on barclays.com for more information and to access everything we spoke about in this episode.